Thank you all for being here tonight, and welcome to our special guest, to Maritza Shelly. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you. We're looking forward to what I'm sure will be a really important conversation. Before we get into our conversation, I thought just given what's happened since last Yom Hashoah, and what happened actually today, brothers and sisters in Israel, going into Rafah, it's really a time for us to come together and a time really to pray. And we usually reserve our prayers at our Yom HaShoah events for the end. But I thought, given the situation, I would ask everyone to join with me for two psalms. We just gave out, Rabbi Ezra and Leah and Michal just gave out some sheets with two psalms that Jews have been reciting throughout the world. You can follow along as best you can together with me. You guys with me on this? Okay, great. Just keep in mind our brothers and sisters in Israel, specifically the Chayalei Tzahal, members of the IDF. Shir la'malot esa einai el harim ma'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. Al yiten lamot raglecha, al yanum shomrecha. Hinei lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra, yishmar es nafshecha. Adonai yishmar tzeischa, uvoecha me'atav yad olam. A song of ascents. I shall raise my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? Our help is from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to falter. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shadow. He is by your right hand. By day, the sun will not smite you, nor will the moon at night. God will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from now into eternity. We're going to try the next one responsively. Just follow along as best you can. Shir hamalos mimamakim karasicho Adonai. Adonai shima v'koli tianu aznecha kashuvos l'kol tachnunai. Im avonos tishmar ya Adonai mi ya'amod. Aki imcha haslicha l'ma'an tivarei. Kivisi Adonai kivsa nafshi v'lidvaro hochalti. Nafshi l'Adonai mishamrim laboker, shamrim laboker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, ki im Adonai hachesed v'harbei mofidus. V'hu yiftes Yisrael mikol avonosav. Together in the English, last paragraph, a song of ascents. From the depths I have called you, O Lord. O Lord, hearken to my voice. May your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. O God, if you keep a record of iniquities, O Lord, who will stand? For forgiveness is with you, in order that you be feared. I hoped, O Lord, my soul hoped, and I wait for his word. My soul is to the Lord among those who await the morning, those who await the morning. Israel hoped to God, for his kindness is with God, and with much redemption is with him, and he will redeem Israel from all of their iniquities. There's a second sheet for Chayalei Tzahal. For the members of the IDF, I ask all to please rise. We're going to recite this tefillah together. Yishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov, was blessed our forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hu yivarech et chayalei tzva haganah Yisrael. May God bless the fighters of the Israel Defense Forces. Hamdim al mishmar etzeinu, who stand guard over our land. V'arei Eloheinu, in the cities of our God. Migvul halevanon, from the border of Lebanon v'ad midbar Mitzrayim, into the desert of Egypt. This is literally where they are. Umin hayam hagadol ad lavo ha'arava, Bayabasha, in the land, Ba'avir, in the air, Uvayam, and upon the sea. Yiten Adonai Tovenu Hakamim Aleinu, Nigafim Lifneihem. May God cause the enemies who rise up against us to be struck down before them. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Yishmar V'Yatzilet Chayaleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah. May God protect our fighting men and women from all difficulty and distress. Vishlach Bracha V'Hatzlacha, and send blessing and success B'chol Ma'aseh Yedehem, in all their endeavors. Yadber Sonenu Tachtehem. V'atrem b'cheter Yeshua v'ater nitzachon v'koyam b'hem ha'katuv, and may there be fulfilled for them the verse, Ki Adonai Elohechem holech imachem lilachem lachem imo yvechem lahoshiatchem v'nomar Amen. It's God who goes with you to battle your enemies for you to save you. Let us all respond. Amen. You can all be seated. I want to again thank you all for being here tonight. Rabbi Ezra Cohen. I want to thank Leah. I want to wish Michal a happy birthday, and thank them all for their incredible work. To Aaron, to Yoel, to Jill, to our whole MJE amazing staff. Our program each and every year on Yom HaShoah is sponsored in memory of the grandparents of our beloved Amanda Dreyer, Harry and Terry Panuski of blessed memory, and a special thanks to Alan and Alicia Pines, who made this event possible, all in memory of Amanda's grandparents, Harry and Terry Panuski, who were also both Holocaust survivors. And Amanda has done a lot for our community in general, but also brought many of the incredible survivors that I've had the honor of interviewing all these years. Our mission here, as many of you know, is to engage the 20s and 30s population in New York City. I shared with Mrs. Shelley our most proud statistic of 387 couples that have met and married through MJE over the years. Got a lot of nachas from that before. But because we're a 20s and 30s population, we've, thank God, been spared the horrors of the Shoah. And while we are privileged to be able to hear firsthand accounts from survivors, it's the most important thing we could ever do. You can always read a book or visit a museum, but nothing compares to hearing from someone who went through this themselves. And given what's happening not only in Israel, but around the world since October 7th, our meeting here tonight to hear the story of a survivor is beyond critical. There's been, as many of you know, a deliberate attempt on the part of, first and foremost, our enemies, but they've been joined even by the world of academia, by professors, by administrators in some of the same universities that we all here studied at, to either outright deny or to contextualize the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, to deny Israel the right to defend herself, to somehow justify the anti-Semitism that is running rampant as we speak on college campus throughout the world. I invite you this Shabbat to come back here this Saturday morning to hear from Daniela, who served in the IDF and is now an undergrad student at Columbia. She's a named plaintiff on one of the 5 lawsuits that are being filed against Columbia University for failing to protect their Jewish students. And she's going to be telling her story, and I encourage you to come this Saturday morning for services. She'll be speaking on Shabbat. And it's unfortunate that the same anti-Semitic slurs and lies about Jews that could be heard, for example, at the University of Berlin in the late 1930s, the same chants can be heard 20 blocks from here. At my alma mater, and I'm sure many of you who attended Columbia as well. Hitler taught the world through his brilliant propaganda minister, Goebbels, that if you repeat a lie often enough, and if it goes unopposed, it will eventually be accepted as truth. And there's only one response to lies and to falsehood, and that is to tell what really happened on October 7th. Not politics, not propaganda, but real life stories of those whose lives were taken hostage or who were killed on that day, and others who have experienced anti-Semitism in their lives, but who survived it and have the courage and the heroism to speak out and to tell their story. And tonight we are privileged to hear from one such special individual, our special guest, Maritza Shelly, who we are honored to host this evening. Maritza has told her story of survival to many, many groups over the years because she is passionate about everyone knowing the truth and learning from history. She's a very loving and peaceful person. I've listened to a number of your interviews, and it's very inspirational, besides educational. Maritza was born, is it okay if I refer to you, or is Mrs. Shelley more appropriate? Maritza, you prefer? Okay. Maritza was born in 1928 in Budapest, Hungary, and after the Nazis invaded Hungary in 1944, she and her sister were selected to be brought to a slave labor camp, and then, as you will hear, she had the opportunity to briefly visit her mother back in Budapest, where her mother was living in the Jewish ghetto at the time. A roundup suddenly took place, and they were sent on a death march. And as they marched, they were reunited with Maritza's sister, and all three women somehow escaped the death march, obtained false papers, hitchhiked back to Budapest with a convoy of German soldiers. We're going to drill down on those, unpack that a little more in a few moments. But after the war, Maritza left Hungary, moved to New York, where she has lived ever since. She earned a degree in the humanities and art history from NYU, worked as a photographer and later as a paralegal, and for the last 18 years has been leading tours at the Brooklyn Museum, and please God, plans to continue to do so for many, many more years to come. She's also a member of the Speakers Bureau at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. That's the Holocaust Museum in Battery Park, where MJE just celebrated. We just had our 25th annual dinner. She is blessed with a daughter and a granddaughter, and we are truly privileged to have her with us here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Maritza Shelly. So I don't forget, Maritza is holding her memoirs that was recently published and is available on Amazon. And I encourage you to go on. It's called In the Very Air We Breathed. This is Maritza just a few years ago. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's start from the beginning, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just tell us a little about your life. Yeah, I think you have the better microphone, so that's good. Tell us a little about your life before the war. Where did you grow up? What was your family like?
I was very fortunate. I actually was born and brought up in Budapest, Hungary. And I have had an older sister, and my mother, father, and also my mother's grandmother lived with us. And before although anti-Semitism was always in the air in Hungary, we were able to live our lives and go to school like other kids until they finally stopped that. But I had a very pleasant, nice childhood, a very loving family, and good education. Actually, I started my education in grammar school at what was called the Scottish school because they taught English in first grade. And my parents always felt that knowing Hungarian only is not going to be very helpful. And so we learned both English and German. And luckily so when I came to this country, I was able to communicate and speak. And I recommend to everyone to learn languages. It's very useful.
Tell us a little about anti-Semitism. Did you experience any anti-Semitism before the war?
Yes, and I made a terrible mistake, and we all did, all through my school years. And we had, all classes were mixed, both the Jewish, non-Jewish, evangelical, Catholic kids. I never had any but Jewish friends. And I think that was a terrible mistake. It wasn't just my doing, but that was generally true. And when I talk to kids about my experiences, when I talk to children in schools in this country, I always emphasize that. I think it's very important that you get to learn about the religions and practices of other kids and other religions. And if you want to ask me, how would you stop anti-Semitism, which you may ask me, I say that's how. And in my opinion, it's very important that you start young to fight anti-Semitism, and that you get to learn other religions and communicate with other kids of different cultures.
Do you feel that? Do you feel that had you been closer and had deeper friendships with some of the other non-Jewish kids that you grew up with in Budapest, that could have changed things a little? That would have perhaps helped things a bit?
I think so. Yeah, I very much think so. And if we all did the same, of course, the whole country would have been different.
Okay, so tell us what changed. The Nazis invaded Hungary later than most of the other countries in Europe.
Okay, because Hungary fought on the side of the Germans. So by 1944, when Hitler has occupied all of Europe and all of the European countries, Hungary was still not occupied because Hitler did not want to lose his Hungarian allies. And the country's leader, who happened to be an admiral without a navy, but he didn't love the Jews, but he didn't want to kill them. So as long as he was able to keep them alive, we had a very different life in Hungary from the rest of the Jews. Because by 1944, 6 million Jews were already killed. And that was the beginning of the Holocaust in Hungary. And they did a very quick job in Hungary. Out of 800,000 Jews, only 200,000 was alive after the war.
Were you and others in Hungary aware already in 1943, 1944, before the Germans invaded, Hungary, were you aware of what was happening in the camps to the Jews of Poland and Czechoslovakia? Or?
Not really. But not many people got out and spread the news about the camps. And although we knew that there were some means of concentrating Jews, we really didn't know the extent of it. And besides, it was just too horrible to believe.
So tell us a little about your experience at the slave labor camp. Were you forcibly taken to the camp? Was that something your family opted into?
No. When the Germans took over Hungary, the so-called Jewish laws were initiated. The very first one was, and I show you, the yellow star. We wore the yellow star over our heart. We had to wear it. This one was made by my mother. She's very clever with her hand. And she made us all the yellow stars because we were not allowed to leave the house without it. After a while, the yellow star became a sign of death, because if they saw someone with a yellow star and they knew that they were Jewish, that was the beginning of the end. So I don't know if you can see this.
So you and your sister both went to the
Yes.
slave labor camp, and without your mother or your father, it was just the two of
That's
you.
right. What happened was that in 1944, March 19th, when the Germans took over and the deportation started, it began with the men. All men from age 18 to 42 had to gather, and they were taken to a slave labor camp. That included my father. About 4 months later, it was the women. The order was that all women 16 to 42 had to gather and be taken. I just turned 16 a month before. So I had to go, my sister, but my mother was 43, so she was able to stay home for a while. So we were told to gather at a gathering place outside of Budapest, and all Jewish women of that age started to march because we had no more trains. The trains to Auschwitz and the various other concentration camps were busy, so we had to walk. We arrived in 2 days in a brick factory. The factory was not in operation, but they had bricks drying, and they were about this far apart and about 6 feet tall. And that's where it was outdoors, of course, and by then it was October. It was rather wet and cold, and that was our place to stay. Our job at the camp was to dig ditches. The ditches was dark because the Red Army was approaching, and they tried to keep the Russian tanks out of Budapest. So our ditches, which were about maybe 4 feet wide and 6 or 7 feet tall, were meant to keep these tanks out of Hungary. After the war, I talked to a Russian tank driver, and I told him that I was digging these ditches. And he said, yeah, we know. When our tanks came to these ditches, we got out, we laughed for 5 minutes, and then we drove our tanks right over it.
And so how long were you digging ditches in the camp?
This was for maybe 2 months or so. And then it was decided that all Jews, any age, any gender, would be taken to a concentration camp or killed on the spot. So the next move was our marching on what was called the Budapest-Vienna highway to a concentration camp, which in our case would have been possibly Auschwitz, but most likely another one of the camps.
But you had gotten to see your mother again.
Yes, my mother was with me for some reason, and I still haven't figured out. When I was with my sister in the work camp, they allowed 16-year-olds to go home. Whose order that was, I still haven't found out. So I left my sister and I walked home. And my mother was there. And I can't tell you the feelings of what it was to see her again. And not only see her again, but to take a hot bath and to get rid of my clothes, which was full of lice. It was heavenly, but it lasted 2 days. The second day, the order came that all Jews still in Budapest will have to go to a camp. Now, this was on what was called the Budapest-Vienna highway. It was a particular highway, it was 4 lanes. On the right side of the highway, going west, were the 50,000 Budapest Jews. On the left side was the German and Hungarian army with all their tanks going east towards Budapest to occupy the city. So it was a very, very busy highway, as you can well imagine, for various reasons. If you want to, I can tell you how we escaped that. Well, so my first...
But before, how long is this walk supposed to be from Budapest to, and you were going to, did you know where you were going?
Well, we were probably going to Mauthausen, was the concentration camp for us. There were, by the way, about 50,000 Budapest Jews on this highway marching.
Please, yeah. And so you were with your
I was
mother?
with my mother,
And
but my sister was still in the working camp or wherever she was. My mother was determined to find my sister because it was obvious that everybody now was on this highway going to Auschwitz or Mauthausen. So my mother knew that my sister was too. So every night when we stopped outdoors on a field or something, my mother would go around looking for my sister. And she went about explaining to people, asking them, have they ever seen anybody like my sister? Well, my sister was very blonde and very good looking, but, what were the chances of all these thousands of people have seen her? Well, the very fifth day, the fifth night, my mother going around describing my sister, somebody said, well, I think I saw someone like her. She's sort of lying around under a tree there. And lo and behold, it was my sister. And it was very lucky that we found her then, because she was in terrible shape. Her feet were totally destroyed. She couldn't have walked another day. And if you can't walk when you're supposed to, that's the end. So my mother tore up some of our clothing and bandaged her feet and did whatever she could do to her. And the next day, when we had to go on marching, we held her between us so she wouldn't have to put her whole weight on her feet. By the way, to go forward a few months and years, my sister became a dancer. We both had studied dancing when we were young. It was a combination of ballet and modern dance. And my sister was determined to stay with it. And she became a very foremost, well-known dancer in Hungary, in Europe, and particularly well-known as a choreographer and teacher. And so you can always have hope. So where did I leave off?
So you were starting. Would you like some more?
Okay.
Fine. You were starting to share how you somehow managed to escape the death march.
Yes. So now that we had my sister with us and we were all three marching together, my mother was determined the next thing to do before crossing the border, the Hungarian border, was she determined to save her children and to somehow escape. And as we were marching, one day, the guards were kind of spread around. It wasn't like there was a guard next to you all the time. And we came to a little bridge over a dried out stream, and there didn't seem to be any guards nor nearby. And my mother said, now, and we grabbed my sister, who didn't want to go anywhere. And we all jumped off the highway and hid under this little bridge. Now, luckily, when we left Hungary and we didn't know where we're going to go and what will happen to us, we packed, my sister and I. Now, what do you pack when you don't know where you're going, what will happen to you? So we did a jacket that didn't have a yellow star on it, some sugar cubes, some vitamins, and a bottle of toilet water. And believe me, it all came very handy. So the sugar cube, so we right away, once we were gone, we started to have our sugar cubes. My sister and I decided that we will try to live as normal a life as we can, because that was the only way we saw to survive this. So we religiously took our sugar cubes, our vitamins, and we had very little water. And I tell you, thirst is horrible, much worse than being hungry. So the little water we had, we used for drinking, not for washing. So the toilet water that we took with us came handy. And every night, my sister and I would change our jackets, change our clothing, have our vitamins, our sugar cubes, and wash with the toilet water. And that's how we survived. And so
you found this bridge, you hid under the bridge.
we hid under the bridge, we changed our jackets so we didn't have a yellow star. And we waited. We waited until we didn't hear any marching over the bridge. And I climbed up to look, and sure enough, there were no Jewish marchers and no guards around. So we went up onto the highway and started to walk towards the nearest little village. No sooner than we did that, we ran into a Hungarian soldier on the highway. So he saw us coming and he said, what are you doing here? Who are you? And he was very suspicious. And my mother said, we are running away from the Russians. They had occupied our village. And we have some relatives in this next village, and they will help us to get to Budapest because my mother said she needs an operation. So that's what we're doing on this highway. And he took it and he said, oh, you have relatives in this village? He said, I come from this village. Who is your relative? And my mother, I can tell you how smart she was, thought of the least Jewish and the most Hungarian name and said, oh, the Kocsis family.
What was the name?
Kocsis. That's very Hungarian name. And
They were a well-known family, they were just...
she just made up the name. And this guy, the guy whom we on the highway said, well, I have relatives in that village. I know the Kocsis. I'll take you there. It wasn't funny. But he did. We went up to a little hill where the village was, and after he just took us there and then he left. Luckily enough, the people of this little village or this little building were out on the potato field. The only person at home was their 10-year-old daughter. And so we told her the same story, that we're running away from the Russians. And we didn't know that all these Jews were marching there. We didn't have any papers. Does he have any school certificates? Because I looked about her age. And of course, all certificates in Hungary of any kind has your religion on it. So this little girl was pleasant enough to give me her school certificate, which said that I was Roman Catholic. And she said, you want to go to Budapest? All you have to do is hitchhike. That's what we all do. You go down to the highway and hitchhike. I'll come with you. So she took us down to the highway, where indeed the Jews were still marching on the right side, and on the left side, going to Budapest, were all the soldiers and equipment. And sure enough, there was a German officer trying to hitchhike and wave down a bus. And this girl said, "Go ask him. He'll probably help you." So we did. We went over to this German officer and told him that we can't, no buses, no trains, nothing. We want to get to Budapest. Could he help us? And he looked at us suspiciously and said, "How do I know you're not Jews?" And my mother said, "Jews? Look at my two blonde children." And here is this German officer who was probably well educated, did believe that Jews would not be blonde. So the bus came, a German officer's bus. He flagged it down. We all got on the bus. One of the German officers got up and gave his seat to my mother. And we traveled all the way back to Budapest. At that point, the bus stopped and the officers got out, and I don't know where they ended up. But here we were. It was at night. It was curfew. Here we were, 3 Jews running away in the middle of the city. There were hardly any, being curfew, there were not many people around at all. And where should we go? Well, we had some good friends who were non-Jewish and whom we knew that if we asked, they would help us. But we had to get there. They were on the Pest side. We ended up on the Buda side. We had to cross the bridge. We had to walk through many streets. But we did it. We managed. Sometimes we had to crawl on our feet when we saw somebody coming, or jump into a doorway to hide. But we managed to get to these friends' house, and they were very courageous and marvelous, honorable people. They took us in, which was could have been they could have been killed for helping us, but they helped us. And we spent the night over there. And the next day, we were able to send someone to our apartment and have them take some papers that my father had acquired the very day that the Germans occupied Hungary. These were false papers, that is, papers that reflected our family of mother, father, 2 teenage daughters, and there were baptism certificates and other papers that we could use. And that's how we survived the rest of the war. We moved to a hotel in Budapest. It wasn't easy because there were a lot of refugees from the villages running away from the Russians. So one day we, going around looking for a place to stay, we found a little, what was called a pension, a little hotel and 2 floors of an apartment building. And it was quite empty. And with our false papers, we were able to go there and get a room with a bed, with water to wash. I mean, it was unbelievable. But it was dangerous because at any time we could be inspected, and who knows who would do that. The pension filled up very soon by refugees. As it turned out, right after the war, we found out that most of the people with false papers hiding in this pension were Jews who were hiding like we did. And one day, my father appeared. I still don't know where he was, where they took him. We never talked about it. We never told him how we escaped or where we were. It was just too much. But there he was, and the four of us were still alive all together. Now, it was dangerous because very often there were soldiers who came and stayed at this little hotel, or people who were obviously not our friends, and we had to pretend to be a whole different family coming from a different town. One day there was a girl who happened to come from that town, and she asked my sister whether have they blown up the sugar factory. And my sister said, yes, oh yes, they blew up the sugar factory. Then she asked me, and I never talked to my sister about this, and I said, no, they haven't blown. And luckily enough, she was sympathetic to Jews, so she did turn us in. Then the siege of Hungary, of Budapest, began. The Russians bombed Budapest from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 at night. It was like a 9-to-5 job. So everybody in Hungary heated with coal. They had coal stoves and ovens. So everybody had a cellar in the building with coal in it. And since we were hiding in this building, we decided to look for somebody's coal cellar. And at that point, everybody was moving down to the cellar because of the Russian bombs. And so we lived in this cellar for almost 2 weeks. We were able to go outside after the bombing started and it was dark. And my father would go out. He wouldn't let us go, but he went out to find some food. And that was very hard. The city was totally destroyed. It was full of dead bodies, dead horses, but no food. Well, we ended up eating the horses. And that's how we survived. One day, the cellar door opened, and there stood a Russian soldier. And we knew that we survived. And that's the end of my story. Please feel free to ask questions. The more, the better.
Any questions? Yeah.
So your entire family, your father, your
You may have to come closer.
I'll just say loudly.
her whole family.
Interesting. He wants to know, so your whole family survived?
Yes.
Yes. They all survived. That's a good question. Yeah.
You mentioned in the beginning that she has a lot of love and light in her heart, even though everything she went through. I hope for her to speak on how she came to that film such a like
What's your name? Avery?
David.
David, I'm sorry. David wants to know how, despite how you were able to remain so optimistic and so positive, so loving to other people after everything that you saw, everything that you witnessed, all the destruction. How did you?
Well, I think the need to survive is so strong. Also, I was 15 years old. I just couldn't think of death. I felt I had to live and have to find a life I liked. And it worked. And also because my immediate family survived, that was very helpful.
She said her immediate family survived, so that was obviously very helpful.
If I can just jump onto that question, you once stated in an interview, I watched a few of your interviews, that none of us are born racists. So I'm just wondering, because this is a problem that I think is manifesting itself in the world again, in regard to Jews and to Israel. Israel is surrounded by populations that are being born, that are being raised to hate Jews. What do you have to say about, I don't even know what my question is. I mean, what do you think should be done? What could be done?
Well, as I said at the beginning, what has to be done, we have to get to know each other. I think that is, if Israel got to know the Palestinian and got friendly with those kids, I'm sure the Palestinians would return there. They would have.
You think all of them? All of them would?
Well, I don't know about that. Sometimes I think hatred is so deep that it's hard to change.
Yeah.
Question: what happened to the family that helped yours? Did they become one of the righteous among the nations?
The family that helped your family when you got back to Budapest. Were they included in the righteous?
They should have been, definitely, but they immigrated to Australia. And I guess they wanted to forget everything. Yeah.
How did you get to America
Oh,
after the war? And my second part to that question is, did you ever connect with anyone from your childhood when you were in America?
and that last part, I don't understand. I came
She wants to know also, did you connect in the United States with anyone from your childhood that was perhaps here in America that was originally from Hungary, that you knew back from your childhood?
Yeah. Well, I came to America because we had relatives in America, in New York, and they were kind enough to pay for my... anyway, they took me in, and my sister stayed, and my mother stayed in Budapest. And my mother always said, I have a daughter who is in a socialist country, because Hungary became a socialist country after the war, and another daughter in a capitalist country. So what could be better? So
Was that difficult leaving your mother and your sister?
it was, I was so homesick for quite a while, for places, for smells, for anything. It was very hard. But I'm glad I did it.
So what advice would you give the younger generation in terms of finding happiness?
In finding
Happiness.
happiness. I think you know how to.
Actually,
Actually, a lot of us are struggling with that. A lot of young people today struggle with finding happiness.
I don't think I'm qualified to give psychological.
You ain't qualified. Oh, no. Yeah, Amanda.
What first inspired you to tell your story?
Oh, I wish I could tell my story more often. I want people to hear, particularly young people, people who think that the Holocaust never happened. If I had a chance, I would be out on the road.
So then my follow-up question is, how do we ensure that the stories of Holocaust survivors continue as we go farther away from the Holocaust?
Unfortunately, we are dying out. I do the math for you. I'm 95 years old, so it's a problem. That's why we try to talk as much as we can. And if you are connected with a school or an organization that would be willing to listen, I would suggest that you all go out and tell the word so we can go and talk as much as we can.
Yeah, in the back. Gentlemen.
How similar or different does it feel in the U.S. today back to Hungary back in the early 40s?
He wants to know, what's your name?
David.
David wants to know whether you see any similarities, what's going on today with all the anti-Semitism going on in America and New York City. I assume since October 7th, which has just grown so much larger since Israel was attacked. Do you see similarities of things happening here that you saw in Hungary before the war?
I can't deny that I'm scared. I don't say that it's the same. And I have a great deal of confidence in the American democracy and the American system. So I have hope. But it is scary.
The part of your story where you mentioned that there was no officers around and you managed to go under the bridge, were there no other Jews that were marching that saw and maybe decided to try and hide with you or try and speak out to see that, why are you, your mother and your sister now sort of leaving the crowd?
When you hit under the bridge, he's asking whether or not, whether other Jews that saw that and tried to maybe hide with you as well.
Well, I guess they didn't because we just so suddenly disappeared from the highway. Other Jews escaped those marches too, in various ways, yes.
After you survived, what were some difficult aspects about your life and what did you do to help yourself after realizing you were safe?
Say that again, help me.
After you survived, what were some aspects of your life that were really challenging and what did you do to get through those challenges?
When you came to America and you had challenges later on in life, what did you do to push through them, to get through them? When you came here yourself, you must have had some difficulties once you came to the United States, or was everything smooth sailing since 1947?
I can't say that. Although I had a very loving husband and an adorable daughter and granddaughter, so it's pretty good. And
You met your husband here
Yes.
in the United States?
Yeah. He's dead now.
All right. Yeah, please.
I wanted to know if, Maritza, have you been back to Europe since the end of the war?
Yes, I've been back to Hungary as well as the rest of Europe. I've traveled quite a bit. I must say that I'm not very happy with the Hungarian head of Hungary now, Mr. Orbán. He's both anti-Semitic and in many ways politically not to my taste. So I'm not anxious to go back to Hungary.
Can I ask you about your feelings for Israel?
Oh, I went to Israel on a trip. I wasn't planning to stay, but my husband and I, and my daughter too was with us at the time. We stayed at a kibbutz. We had some people whom we knew from somebody else who knew them, and they were willing to take us in they were building some new houses for the members of the kibbutz, and they had a couple of houses ready, and they invited us to try them out. So we had a very nice time in Israel. I must confess that I studied Hebrew, we had to in school, for many years. But I couldn't ask for a glass of water in Hebrew.
If I was the prime minister of Israel, and I was coming to you for some guidance and advice, any words of wisdom?
Well, I'm afraid I'm quite a bit like the students. I call out for stopping the fight and having peace and trying to work out something. It's always possible. If you give up at the beginning, then you lost. But I think mostly people do want peace. And extreme hatred is not as common, I hope.
Do you think that would have been possible in any way with the Nazis?
Well, no.
Yeah, please.
Thanks for coming, sharing your story, first of all. Are you ever surprised when anti-Semitism comes up again, rears its ugly head?
Are you surprised when you see expressions of anti-Semitism?
I'm not sure surprise is the... Yeah, probably surprised too. But the extreme reaction of fear, of hatred, of whatever response.
Yes.
The presence of mind that your mother had in coming up with way after way, it seems, of finding the right thing to say or the right decision to make that seemed to save you from a terrible fate. Did that surprise you about her, or was that something that that you figured, oh, that's just her?
Just a little bit about my mother.
He was asking when your mother came up with that Bubba about the family.
Yeah.
You know, were you surprised? Have you ever heard your mother lie so well?
No, I think she was pretty careful about not doing it in front of us. But I wasn't surprised because she was very strong and very life-affirming. And I totally trusted her to come up with something to save us.
Yes, in the back.
How was it for your family, specifically your sister who stayed in Hungary, transitioning after the war, I guess living in a country that wanted to kill her, and then here she was, you know, staying there and building a life after the war, how, I guess my question is, how was she able to, and all of you, able to look at your neighbors the same and build that life again in the same place that
She's asking, how it's a great question. How is it for your mother and your sister to remain in Hungary after the war? Were they able to get along with other people? Did they feel like they're friends? I mean, you were saved by some wonderful Hungarian Gentiles, but a lot were not so wonderful. A lot were turning into Jews. Was that difficult for your mother and your sister to stay and live in Hungary then?
Well, actually, it became against the law in Hungary after the war to express any anti-Semitism. So it wasn't that obvious, and it's, yeah.
The Russians who control Hungary made it illegal.
Well, I'm not sure whether it was the Russians or the Hungarian communist government.
Were you able to hear that?
no, I didn't hear that.
She was saying, Maritza was saying that it became illegal in Hungary after the war to
express anti-Semitism or to act in any way.
Yeah, Jill.
What happened to all of your friends, your classmates? I mean, do you know what happened to everyone?
Not everyone, unfortunately. Most of my Jewish friends I lost. After the war, we tried to get one class meeting, get together. And it was very sad. Very few of the Jews from the class. Yes. Well, they all survived, and also many of them left Hungary, went to Israel.
I'm sorry, what about the non-Jews in your class? Did you ever...
Your friends who weren't Jewish.
A follow-up to the question, was there...
I didn't have non-Jewish friends. That was the problem. But
was that just you? Or was
no,
that in general?
That was the general.
And is that because they wanted to segregate Jewish people, or was that a
Well, we
choice?
just didn't expect to be accepted.
Uh-huh. So there was a lot of anti-Semitism.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you first came to the United States, what was your reaction to the American Jewish population here, the diversity of Jewry all across the United States, and then what do you see as the future of American Jewry as we head into the latter half of the year?
So when I first came.
Yeah, what was your reaction to the American Jewish community here in the United States?
I don't know if I particularly was involved in the Jewish community when I came here. Some of the friends I made were Jewish and some weren't. And since I wasn't particularly religious, I didn't seek out very religious Jews or friends.
And what do you see as the future of American Jewry?
He's asking what do you see as the future of American Jewry? You're getting some big questions.
That's too much. I'm not a sage. I can't tell you.
We're just
All
going
I can tell you is make friends with each other. Then the Jews will be left alone.
One last question. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, thank you for coming to share your story with us. My question is, how did your experiences in the war and surviving affect your faith in God and your Jewish identity?
She wanted to end with a light question. How your experiences in the war affected your faith in God and your own connection with your Judaism, your Jewish identity.
As I said, we weren't particularly religious. Because of state and country and education were not separate in Hungary, everybody had to go to their religious classes once a week, like mathematics or chemistry or whatever. So I did get Jewish education, studied Hebrew, not successfully.
We have, by the way, every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock.
It was an all-Jewish school, but on Fridays, we girls conducted service. And
For Shabbat.
yeah, that was the extent of my belief.
Did you feel a little, just to tag on to that, we're going to finish up because it's getting late. Thank you so much for giving us all so much time. It's very kind of you. Did you, yeah. I just, you feel obviously very lucky. You know, do you feel that somehow there weren't so many survivors from Hungary? You're amongst a very small group, unfortunately. Do you feel that there was some, I don't know, some force out there that was with you? I mean, obviously your mother,
yes,
and your father, you know,
my mother,
your parents.
definitely my mother, but I think it was our own will to live.
Yeah.
And being clever about it. Having false papers.
Yeah.
By the way, I later learned that some underground Zionist groups created false papers for Hungarian
Jews. Oh, wow. Wow. Well, had Israel at the time, Palestine, been open and accessible to Jews, there would have been a lot more Hungarian Jews that would have lived, obviously. Yeah. But thank God you did, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Really,
thank you.
Oh, no, you're wonderful.